All right. And we're live. It is Thursday, October 15th, 2020, 5:02 p.m. Amy Coney Barrett is done with her hearings. Lindsey Graham has given the coronavirus to the ranking member, or if he hasn't, it wasn't for lack of trying, and the ranking member has accepted the coronavirus as her due, or if she hasn't, it wasn't for lack of grace and willingness to be hugged without a mask by a guy who has refused to take a coronavirus test. And all of this is said to have something to do with filling a vacancy on a Supreme Court rather than with theater of the absurd. It is, of course, a dog shirt day. How could it be otherwise? I am proud to say I did not watch a single minute of the hearings. And I want to take a moment to explain why. These are the first hearings I've ever not bothered to watch a minute of. Mostly I watch all the minutes. But here we have a situation in which I have never had doubt about the formal qualifications of the nominee, nor do I have the slightest bit of doubt about the ideological orientation of the nominee. And while those two things alone might make me scratch my head and say, what should I support a nominee who's clearly qualified in all the formal senses and whom I expect to disagree with a great deal? And that is a matter that I have wrung my hands over many years with many different nominees, much to the irritation of people like Dahlia Lithwick. But this time I don't have to do any of that because there is this antecedent like you might say if we were a court, a jurisdictional question that prevents me from having any desire to reach the merits of this particular nominee. And that question is, should having held a seat open because 9 months is way too long, is way too short to get a nominee through in an election year, should we get one done in a month and a half before an election? And it turned out that the principle that the majority articulated very earnestly 4 years ago, which was that we should hear from the people before confirming the justice, actually meant we should hear from the people before confirming the democratic justice. And I don't agree with that principle. And so my view is that I don't really care what Amy Coney Barrett has to say. I'm sure she's a very nice woman, and I'm sure she believes a lot of things that I don't believe, and I'm sure she has a lot of people who will say very nice things about her, and I will concede all that. And my view is under no circumstances should they be considering the nominee at all. Therefore, it doesn't matter what she says. And I can spend my week doing other things which Dahlia Lithwick and Kate Shaw, who I'm now told is here, cannot do. So they watched the hearings, so I don't have to. They are not allowed to have fun anymore. I am allowed to have a little bit more fun than them. In lieu of fun, we have a Moscow Mule, we have Dahlia, and we have Kate, who should pop up on the screen momentarily.
Oh, that Kate, yes.
Other Kate, yeah. We also have you, but we always have you, kind of like we always have dog shirts, and we always have me. Lice, yeah. So my question is, there is Kate Shaw. Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks. Good to see you.
So my question, you are
Kate,
the first person ever to
show?
appear on In Lieu of Fun at the end of a long haul. It's an excellent
We're
shot.
all
It has this-
improvising. I'm literally next to my linen closet. We've set up a little desk in the corner.
Don't ever change this. It will. I'm going to send it to Room Raider with
straight out of The Shining or
with a
something?
stern note, because it's an awesome
I have
shot.
some
and we
good.
should-
I've got some good stuff on the wall, but the shot doesn't really capture it. We're all working with what we have here.
I totally love this shot. I think it's
very good.
You know, I
you.
believe we should all go on shows with the houses we have, not the front gate catalog in which we don't live. And
Sort of a backhanded compliment. I think it's a genuinely nice hallway.
I love your hallway. I just think we shouldn't all strive to look. It was meant as
To
a
look
not
good.
backhanded compliment. I'm sitting here in front of a frickin' brick wall.
It's a beautiful exposed brick wall.
It
It's
is a
objectively
nice
nicer
exposed-
than my hallway. But
welcome, guys. So,
Thank
how
you.
big a shit show was it?
Should we actually introduce Kate? Kate Shaw is a professor at Cardozo Law School, and she is also a frequent MSNBC contributor. And
ABC, but it's down the
ABC.
hallway. Is my resident MSNBC? But it's fine. We
I was okay.
We do a lot of
sorry,
TV
I
from
just
my house.
assumed actually. I had a moment there. I was like, no, that has to
No.
be right.
And she's one of the strict scrutiny people, which
Yes.
is just an awesome thing to be.
And this
and
group
I don't-
is huge fans of Leah and Melissa, who've been on many times. They're amazing.
And I don't
as all
think we've
right-thinking
ever
people
met.
should be. I don't think so.
It-
I feel like I'm trying to remember. I have some vague recollection of you being in chambers with Judge Posner about 15 years ago. Does that ring a bell to you? Paying a visit
Wow.
to.
It sure does.
So I think I think when I was clerking
Was that
for
when
him.
you were clerking?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the day he received by mail the shipments of his little book of plagiarism.
That was the year I was
And-
clerking. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Yep. He was
And
expecting it to be a bestseller, and it never really understood why it wasn't. But
No, I walked in and he said to me in his preternaturally high voice, "Hi Ben, I wrote a little book of plagiarism."
oh, that's perfect. That's
which
your
I
book of
didn't-
Posner. Yeah.
Which I didn't assume meant. I thought he meant it was like.
it was.
And then he takes out of this tiny little book called A Little.
The
Book of
title is a little book.
Plagiarism. Yeah, A Little Book of
I
Plagiarism.
can't remember the article, but I think it's a little. Well, the little book
It's
of
A
plagiarism.
Little Book of
Is it?
Plagiarism.
Yeah, because there are
And
many.
it was, I thought
Yeah.
it was completely charming, and yeah, no, so we have met.
We briefly did meet, but we've all,
So
we've been through the
I'm
ringer
not-
of time.
So, speaking of the Seventh Circuit,
Yeah.
how was today, or the last 3 days?
Yeah, so I've been teaching today. So for Dahlia's count, every second of your life you're never going to get back. I watched most of it. I didn't watch a minute of today, which is just the outside witnesses, but I did watch the opening statements and the rounds of questioning. Not every second, but probably the vast majority of it. How much of it, Dahlia, did you watch? All of it? All of it?
Close to. There were a couple. This would be a fun question. There were a few that I had to mute. There'd be a fun on Slack chain where we'd all be like, "Yep, mutant Ted Cruz." Like there, I'd be curious.
When the feed went down, were you like, oh,
there
we can
were
take a break? Was the relief, the technical
when the
difficulties?
microphones just stopped working. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there were a few people that just demanded muting, and I won't lie, I muted them.
So who
But
were they?
I
Who were the
watched
people
her-
that, in the context of this bullshit, were such bullshit that you couldn't listen to?
Well, can we talk about Ben Sass for a minute? The guy who started with Civics 101 and ends the week trash talking the president. Oh,
Yeah,
Civics
in
101.
private though.
Wait, were you filming on that? I just saw something as I finished teaching and then turned this on. What was the recent Ben Sass revelation?
Just that he was talking off the record on a call and just trashed Trump. And it's just funny because he just presents as this, why can't we all just, be civil and, yeah, letter to the file.
Oh.
So let me ask you both. Is there anything of substance that we learned about Amy Coney Barrett this week?
So I thought that she missed. I mean, I found her. She seemed more conservative to me in the hearing than I expected, and I expected her to be extremely conservative. I think she will be, possibly a sort of Thomas Alito hybrid on the court, is sort of what the impression I came away with. I found really concerning her conspicuous failure to seize a bunch of very easy opportunities to distance herself a little bit from some of the president's rhetoric around the election in particular. I thought her refusal to answer questions about unilateral authority to reschedule the election, about whether president should publicly commit to departing office peacefully following a defeat, were really concerning. I think there were just very easy, low-cost ways and gracious ways. You just don't want to appear confrontational with the president to just say, I'm not aware of any arguments the president has any unilateral authority to do anything about the date of the election, and I'd be surprised if there are any. Like Roberts gave an answer like that. Remember, 2005, he's asked, do you remember this, Kate? Like, I went back and looked at it. Actually, it was a really interesting, it's a much more...
He was savvier.
He was, but he was also so substantive, as even that, it felt a little like empty and hollow at the time, and looking back, it's like, oh, that was a deep, substantive debate, in relative terms, at least. But Leahy is pressing him on like a Korematsu Redux situation in 2005. And this is not that far after September 11th. And there's a question about whether the government could, and I can't remember whether the hypo is like Congress passed a law, but I think it's an executive action, but, rounds up individuals on the basis of race, religion, national origin. And it's a specific hypo. And it was 2005, and we were at the height of the war on terror. And it's not a crazy thing to imagine that some version of that could come before the Supreme Court. And he basically says, I guess a case like that could come before us. I would be surprised, and I would be surprised if there are any arguments in defense of it. And that's saying something, but it's also drawing some kind of boundaries around sort of the sort of reasonable topics about which reasonable minds can disagree. And she just refused to do that. And it normalized some of these pretty abnormal statements in ways I found just deeply disheartening, honestly.
So
and just to draw a line under that point, in Roberts's mind, I think that issue did come before the court, because he, in his majority opinion in the travel ban case, he made a point of declaring formally that Korematsu was no longer good law, and so it was not entirely hypothetical as you describe.
But to Ben's point, and I'm interested in but Dahlia and Kate, what both of you have to say about this. So that was interesting because both the way it was so artful, because it gets at the jurisdictional issue, it gets at the issue, it tilts, it has absolute implications about his belief in stare decisis, right? And about like a decided opinions that he doesn't say, but like, deeply imply, like you can't miss that. And then obviously, as Ben said, the travel ban like drew a line under it. But it does actually answer substantively exactly what you asked, which is like gratifying, which is like unlike both the Kavanaugh hearings and this hearing, like which just feels like nothing particularly, how do I say, like creative about any of the answers, or particularly introspective about the law and everything else from the answer. Did you feel that way with the last two hearings, or is it just me? I'm saying this as like a person who didn't agree in theory substantively with Roberts, Kavanaugh, or Amy Coney Barrett. But I remember Roberts' hearing ending and being like, he was very good.
He was dazzling. He was dazzling. He was absolutely dazzling.
Right?
I didn't feel that way.
That was art.
I thought she was going to be like John Roberts, because anybody I've talked to who knows her either from the 7th or from Notre Dame has said she is similarly like winning. She was not winning. She was not charming or charismatic. And, John Roberts, I don't recall ever a moment of defensiveness or umbrage, like how dare you? And that was like such a through line here.
But Roberts was, among other things, just a superb oral advocate, and I think his background as a litigator who's in front of appellate bodies, being peppered with questions and cannot get flustered, if all of a sudden he found himself, he's used to arguing in front of RBG and Scalia, and then all of a sudden he's in front of a bunch of idiots, and like they're pulling out their red questions, their questions to read, and they think, oh, my staffer's really written one that's gonna get him this time. And you could smell the contempt in that, and I don't mean this as criticism of Roberts. You couldn't watch it without contempt. He's got 30 IQ points on most of them, and he's just much better at this game.
It's like a tiger with a baby. Like, it's just like, and like everyone is a baby to John Roberts' tiger.
I didn't think that Roberts ever thought for one second that it was about him, that it was this a test about. I think part of the huge anxiety in this one was this performance of religious, grievance and accusation and unspoken accusation, and Josh Hawley screaming like a crazy person about Griswold. And then I think that with just this performance of gender in a really like strange way meant that, in some ways, like John Roberts had the privilege of like not having all that layered up identity crap. And I just think, part of the reason she came in with a chip on her shoulder is because she knew she was going to get, rightly or wrongly, she wasn't actually tagged for religious, stuff or much for gender stuff. But I just think it was about her. Every second of it was about her. And that anxiety, I think, just seeped into the questioning and into her answers. And Roberts, I think, just was like, this is a show. I'm going to play a part. It's not about me. And if it were someone else, it would be this. And I just think that is easier on everyone.
So I want to raise an uncomfortable issue about this that I've been stewing about for a while. What do we think of the ethics of her accepting a nomination under these circumstances? So I look at it and I say, if you're Merrick Garland, and just full disclosure, I, adore Merrick Garland. I've known him forever, and so I'm probably not the best judge of this question. But if you're Merrick Garland and it's February of an election year, you probably know you're walking into a contentious judicial confirmation, because everybody knows that all judicial confirmations at that level are now contentious. But I don't think you know that you're walking into a war. But if you're her and it's 8 weeks before the election, people are already voting, Merrick Garland has already happened, and you are trading, you are trading the possibility of being on the Supreme Court for being an instrument in a remarkable power play within the political branches. And I'm troubled by that ethically. It doesn't violate any of the canons of ethics. I'm not comfortable with it either. And I'm curious for both of your sense, just whether you share that discomfort. Leave aside her ideology, leave aside, like, a president as divisive while people are voting wants to name you to the Supreme Court over the fervent objections of the opposition party, with a recent track record, literally as recent as can be, of his own party having taken diametrically the opposite view. There's a degree of political alignment inherent in accepting the nomination that seems to me to be inconsistent with the judicial function.
I think I agree with that. And to tie it back into the point I made earlier, I think because of those background conditions, it was especially important that she find some way to create some distance between herself and the president. And she could have, in the opening statement, acknowledged the circumstances in which her nomination was made. She could probably, I think we talked about this a little bit on my podcast, but could she have exercised a bit of control over the timing of the nomination announcement, over the conditions of the announcement? Could she have said, I don't think a COVID party in the Rose Garden is the best way for me to meet the country? It was, I think, wildly irresponsible for them to do this in person at all. I mean, it may well be that there are many other shoes to drop, but there are lots of staffers in that room, mostly masked, but people took their masks off all the time. We could see another super spreader event having just concluded today. Like, I don't know. We don't know yet. So I feel like, yes, I think that probably a what would Merrick do test, probably Merrick Garland offered the position under these circumstances. Not probably, I think almost certainly declines and says, I have a very, a wonderful life and job in the DC circuit. I too, think he's the menchiest of menches. I'm not sure anybody actually disagrees with that proposition. So I think that I'm not sure she had to decline, to satisfy whatever ethical test I think should apply here. But I think if she were going to accept it, I think that she could have done it on terms different from the ones that would have demonstrated character in a different way. And I think she conspicuously didn't do that.
Yeah. I would add, I wrote a little bit about this yesterday, but I think that, she was lashed to Trump, lashed to his promises about what she would do, lashed to that Rose Garden ceremony, lashed to Josh Hawley saying, he wouldn't vote for her. She came in there with 100 pounds of baggage that she did not want to be carrying. And I agree with Kate. For me, it's funny, of all the things you said, Kate, an unwillingness to say to Amy Klobuchar, yes, absentee ballots are an important part of democracy. That's beyond the president can't extend his term unilaterally or can't delay the election. Yeah. That's telling people who are sitting there in freaking Milwaukee trying to decide if they should vote in person or, mail in a ballot. And she's saying, hey, it's kind of an open question. Maybe all mail-in ballots are, inherently a hoax. And for me, that was like off the charts irresponsible, because it wasn't just a sort of, I'm keeping an open mind about whether the president can, assassinate Antifa people with extrajudicial orders. She was literally saying to people who are trying to figure out at home whether their mail-in ballot is going to be thrown out, no, go get in a line with COVID. Like, that's just reckless to the point of, and it's, again, cost-free. It is cost-free as a judge to say, of course every ballot counts. That's like, the cornerstone, right? The foundation stone. And so for me, that also was very remarkable. And I guess I would just add, to Kate's point, I think I even wrote this a few weeks ago, how problematic it is to stand in the Rose Garden at what becomes a super spreader event, introducing your kids who are from a country that this president has described as a shithole country, and to just sit there and bite your tongue and say, it's okay, it's all worth it. And whether or not it's perfectly transactional, it looks perfectly transactional. And, one of the things that was really difficult was when pressed on the optics of it, her answer was unerringly like, I'm not biased. Nobody at the White House has extracted a pledge from me, so that's not the standard. Like, the standard is not, are you biased?
I also don't believe, I think one of the lessons of the Trump era is that nothing is actually purely transactional. That you enter into these relationships in a purely transactional way. But over time, the nature of the corruption that induces in you causes you to have a feeling of identification by way of self-justification. And all of these people, what do I know? I got the guy completely wrong. But I don't think Bill Barr started out saying, I'm a Trump true believer. I think Bill Barr started out as hardcore conservative who had a, history of public service, who believed in certain things, and who thought he could make a contribution. But then once you've made that initial commitment, the incentive to see everything through a certain lens becomes really acute. And I guess I don't believe in purely transactional relationships with highly corrupt individuals anymore. I'm not sure I ever did, but I if you can answer the question, if you can't answer the question, does every vote count? But you can answer questions that are theoretically wholly methodological. And by the way, such and such, Brown is a super precedent, but Roe isn't. So there's a lot of normative content in that, right? And if you're drawing those lines, then the relationship is not purely transactional. It's you're figuring out a way to justify the lines that you've drawn.
So let's talk for a second to follow up on Ben's point about the kind of about the how you talk to people and everything else. Her reaction to John Kennedy's remark about the laundry. I don't know if you guys saw this. So just to explain it, John Kennedy, Republican Senator John Kennedy, it goes something along the lines of, just a question. Can I ask you a question about your home or something like that? And then she's like, yeah, sure. And then kind of laughs. And then he's like, who does your laundry when you're here right now? And she laughs and is like, you are a mother of 7. Who does your laundry while you're here right now? And
question nobody ever asked John Roberts, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say. And she just laughs and she's like, we're trying to teach them to do their own laundry. Because, I would also teach my kids to do their own laundry if I had 7 of them, let's be honest. Otherwise, they just wear the same thing every day like me. But it was amazing. I had this real moment of my mom, when she was running for state Supreme Court in 1992, 1993, was constantly on the campaign trail being asked who's taking care of her children. And she would respond with whoever's taking care of John Saragusa's children, who was her opponent at the time. And but I was that was 1992 and 1993. And we thought it was we would laugh about how outmoded and sexist it was. And here we are in 2020. And that was an actual on the record Senate thing. Was there some type of meta narrative in that question that I completely missed? Or was it that terrible?
Oh, I'm not saving Senator Kennedy there. No, it was just a gross sexist question that was clearly it should be you, but you're here. So who is it?
But how did he who approved that? Or did he come up with that on his own?
I can't imagine it was scripted, but it was it was the last question he asked in one of the, right? I think maybe it was. Maybe
yes, it was. It was the last question. It was just yeah.
I mean, his whole, I will, he had a colloquy with her when she was trying to serve her softball questions designed to establish this proposition that she, has some views, but also will keep an open mind in cases, and ended up tangling with her about climate change in a way that was not at all, I don't think, his intention, but did, I think, inadvertently reveal maybe she is a climate change skeptic, which I thought was another potentially really inadvertently revealing moment, because she's willing to concede things like COVID is contagious and smoking causes cancer, but not that humans cause climate change. So that too, I thought was deeply concerning. But on the laundry, I got nothing. Dahlia, what do you think?
No, I mean, there was some meta-narrative that started with Lindsey Graham and went through to Marsha Blackburn, and it was about how she is a better feminist than all the other feminists, and
she's a Phyllis Schlafly feminist.
Yeah, I mean, she's just better because she has 7 kids, which is 5 more than I do, and because she's somehow juggling more, and the sort of I thought for me the meta narrative was this and it kept coming up finally conservative girls can have a hero too, having been locked out of any sense of pride or dignity. This is their moment.
You can be a mother and a lady, and you can and you can also be a Supreme Court justice.
it was really weird. And I it's interesting because it leans on all the Ginsburg cliches. Like, they can't even invent new cliches, so they have to like go back to the, go back to the well of like, who does the cooking? Like that was at the Rose Garden. Let us know, I've got my own Marty. He's better than Marty because we have more kids. And it's so kind of, I have no answer. I would ask, can I ask one substantive question? Is that okay if I thread Jack, just because I was so excited to be on with dorks? Is her super precedent and Griswold thing as big a deal as I think it is?
I mean, I don't know if Ben or Kate have thoughts on it. It seemed like a big, important moment to me to not concede that Griswold settled. I mean, it was a huge deal when Bork wouldn't do it. And, Bork had been explicitly critical of Griswold, but his it would never come up anyway was like almost verbatim some of the things that she said in response to Griswold. Let's not worry about it. It was like almost like, does she realize how that story ended? Because it seems strange for her to be channeling it. But I feel like a big deal to me.
And really notably different from, to go back to our John Roberts comparison, notably different from the way John Roberts answered the same question, which, as I recall, was to emphasize repeatedly, I have no quarrel with Griswold, which was, a graceful way of not saying, hey, I'm going to say I think a precedent is rightly decided because that's awkward. And I'm certainly, but I'm going to signal, I haven't, look, if you think I'm sitting here spending my time thinking Griswold v. Connecticut is dead the moment I get up there, that's not what I'm doing. And I thought her answer was tonally very different from that.
Yeah.
For me, it doesn't parse in the way that I think of precedent and I think of Brown and how I put it all theoretically into my head and make sense of it against stare decisis and everything else, which is just that like the norms change so much, and to the point of touching natural law that like you just can't like abide that type of law anymore. And like to that extent, to a call for super precedent, I guess I could understand how that doesn't ring true for her with Griswold and rings true for Brown, but I think that they're both just like completely subjective, like personal moral decisions that are based in your own experience, and that like that there are some of these that we've collectively decided as society are just completely off the books, and she just like, I think she acknowledged that like this was an area that like maybe isn't off the books for her. So
well, it's not off the books, right? Sarah Pitlick, who's elevated, to the court, has dedicated a career to like IVF and surrogacy. Like this is not Roe anymore. I think we're talking about, and that's why I thought for me it was gobsmacking because, she was being called out on signing that, the ad that said life begins at fertilization. And there's one way to kind of allay fears about that, and that is just to say, of course, Griswold is super precedent. But I feel like for me, the reason I raise it is because it signals that the ground has shifted in a really deep way, even from John Roberts, like Ben says, and that I think we missed it. Like, I think we blinked and we missed it.
Like they're going straight for stem cells. Go ahead. Sorry.
The floor is yours, but not that stem cell, because that stem cell is okay. Esther, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks for watching the hearings for me. I think it would have been very painful. I'll read my question. To what degree has originalism become, in essence, a religious orthodoxy, with the Constitution serving as the sacred book? I ask this because original intent would have been influenced by societal norms at that time. And so why are we eschewing modern norms? If we're willing to only focus on those, then I think that puts the Constitution in a very special place. And I'm going to just attach a second question, which didn't get upvoted, but it, to me is related, which is to what degree do personal values influence juridical thinking? And have there been many academic studies to establish that link?
Great questions.
Who wants to take it?
Not it.
Kate, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the religion, the kind of fetishization of the Constitution that is kind of at the heart of originalism, and the fetishization of the Constitution as understood at the time it was drafted and ratified by the very small subset of the population who had the, ability and were sort of imbued with the authority to actually, read, understand, and have views on these things. It has like a quasi-religious feel to it. I think that is fair to say. I think there are different forms of originalism, and I think some of them are a little bit more like, kind of expansive approaches to interpretation that would, I think of Will Bode as basically in this category, which kind of centers the text of the Constitution and cares about the understanding at the time it was drafted and ratified, but allows all kinds of other considerations to sort of enter the equation when we're figuring out particularly what these kind of vague or open-ended due process of law, the freedom of speech, these kind of phrases might mean. And so there is space for kind of using present norms, values, intervening developments to help us sort of interpret the Constitution. But I saw her as defending a pretty austere and narrow
originalism
form that really is like kind of a Thomas More than Scalia or anybody else on the court in recent years kind of version of originalism. And I think that because it is kind of so formalistic, and I mean, she's like, there was almost this kind of like, I didn't count how many times she sort of proudly identified as an originalist, but I don't remember Kavanaugh, like the sort of identity category was so front and center. She really like takes not just the method seriously, but the identity, like as an adherent to these approaches, to these theories, like really and strangely kind of seriously. I mean, they're just tools, right? But the tool itself sort of was the thing that she wanted. She was kind of the only place you sort of saw. She was tense the whole time, but it sort of dropped a little bit and she got genuinely animated a little bit, I thought, when she was talking about the methods. But because it's so formalistic as practiced by like Thomas, say, it doesn't really worry about what might get dismantled or burned down along the way. So, I mean, we're talking about kind of individual rights issues, Roe and Griswold, but certainly kind of structural constitutional questions, things like a revival of a big, robust version of the non-delegation doctrine, which would throw into question the constitutionality of much of what the federal government does. I can well see happening in the very near future. I mean, they were basically there already, but Roberts was, maybe not so willing to go very far down that road, but, I don't know, I guess, willing to go somewhat down that road. But I think that, like they might burn down the whole administrative state, like they might do it soon. And I thought that all seemed very possible because I think that's where originalism in this very radical form takes us, actually, or at least.
Do you really? So that's actually, I don't know that I've ever heard someone carry originalism through to burning down the administrative state. Although that does logically follow. I just haven't actually allowed myself.
Yeah.
Of course it does.
I mean, just like a couple of little sort of specific doctrinally, the non-delegation doctrine, right? Congress can't delegate legislative power,
totally.
And even like the ability to do legislative rules, notice and comment rulemaking. If that's like agencies making laws, that's in this very formalistic conception of the separation of powers, unconstitutional. And so I think Gorsuch thinks, so like I think that's all of it. That's all of the
right, and the whole dispute between Myers and in the appointments clause area, right? From Myers to Humphrey's executor to Morrison, you have
totally.
this how direct does presidential control of the executive branch need to be? Which is, not really consistent with the administrative state either, given the independence of the independent agencies.
I mean, I saw an overlap in the people that obviously hate the administrative state and are originalists, but I hadn't necessarily made the connection. Of course, I'd done it in pieces, but until you just said that, I was just kind of aha. There was just it just kind of I was I get it. I get how originalism could be the thing that pushes this in that direction. Sorry if I'm this isn't my. I spend all day yelling at people on Twitter about Facebook and
it's a good time to be doing that.
And the First Amendment. So it's but
Dahlia, do you have thoughts about originalism as religion?
I mean, I think, I'm a little more mystical, and I think that the two appeals of originalism are one, it's got its roots in biblical exegesis. I mean, it's about pulling out dictionaries, and someone said to me today, that this is a really religion-based practice, that there's a holy document and we pick, a million other holy documents from which to interpret the holy document. And I do think at bottom, I mean, it's just funny because I've done a bunch of news hits with like Australian and British and, you know, other, you know, countries. And they're all like, go back to the part where like the Ouija board and like figuring out, you know, what the framers meant like in the dictionary when they talked about the right to, like, it's hilarious to people. And I think that there is something quasi-religious about it and fetishistic. I think that it's charm, and this is a legitimate charm. I mean, I think Kate's right. It has many charms. And one charm is that it holds itself out as a sort of humble and neutral enterprise, as a constraint. And I was really amazed at how easily it trips off the tongue that if you're an originalist, you're not making law. You're just interpreting law, and everyone else is legislating from the bench. And it's, I mean, at one level, just utter bunk, but it's just really, really a charming sales pitch. And
yes,
nobody
you're completely right. Like that, you're just, I've said this for so long. Sorry, keep going. I'm just like excited to hear you say it.
No, it's funny, you know, like here's Ted Cruz and here's, you know, Mike Lee, and like somehow when you're talking about guns and edging the boundaries of Heller, like way beyond Scalia's text in Heller, that's originalist, right? You're not making policy. You're just divining what the framers wanted to do in terms of restoring Helen's guns rights. And I just think it falls so neatly into this utterly, in my view, fatuous distinction between sort of making things up and divining, you know, deeply held truths, that even when you're making things up, if you're anxious about judicial power,
it's 13 minutes past
story, you hold it very well.
So I just want to say a couple words in defense of originalism, for which I have a little bit more sympathy than I suppose my views are probably similar to Kate Shaw's, but originalism covers a lot of ground, and I think to the extent that it stands for the idea that we should take text seriously as text, and that the text means what the people who wrote it meant, which isn't to say it has no elasticity for new circumstances, but it doesn't mean whatever we want it to mean now, and so therefore history is important. It strikes me as a wholly unobjectionable set of ideas, and I think at its best, it does induce a certain historical fidelity to meaning and text, and, you know, like a little bit like the new critics in literary criticism, at their best, the textualists do a heck of a job divining meaning from text alone, either in statutory work or in less frequently, I think, in constitutional work. The problem to me arises when you start asserting that no other factors are ever legitimate, because those other factors are coming into the conversation one way or another. And, you know, Heller is a really good example of that. If the founders have no idea what a modern weapon looks like, and so you represent, as Justice Scalia did, Heller as the equivalent of what a soldier would carry, which at the time was a musket and is now a high-power assault weapon. You really inject a lot of opportunity for the justice or the five justices to kind of make the world look like what they think, how they think then should be translated to now. And I do think that's a very dangerous game to pretend that is value neutral. But I don't think the underlying enterprise of giving primacy to that history is illegitimate. we seem to have lost Kate Shaw.
No, she had to go for childcare reasons. She texted me, but she said thank you and she loved the conversation, and yeah. So, and I think that she will. I would love to have her on again. She was awesome, obviously. But
Sam, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, my question relates to Barrett's expressed reason at a couple of points to not responding to questions. And she suggested that the Judicial Code of Conduct limited what she could say. And I've looked at the Judicial Code and sort of see some thin reeds, but it doesn't really seem to cover shutting down conversations about issues during testimony to Congress. What do people think about that? I mean, if indeed the Judicial Code speaks to that, it strikes me that she's criticizing everyone who's ever answered a question in front of Congress.
So I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. Dahlia, I'm sure, does as well. Kate, I don't know whether you've thought about this, but Dahlia, what do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts about it, but go ahead, Dahlia.
I didn't hear her citing to the Judicial Code of Conduct for this. I heard her pretty consistently citing to what she called the Ginsburg rule, the no hints, no tips, no forecast, which is of course a paradox because Ginsburg, having said that, then testified for days on end about her views of reproductive freedom. But I think where she was leaning on the ethics, talking about recusal, heard something different from you. I think her basis for not answering, I mean, I guess you're right. I think that, why? Because of this appearance of impropriety or appearance of having prejudged, right? That's the canons. But I think she was even sort of more deft than that. I think she kept putting in the mouth of Justice Ginsburg the notion that anything that could plausibly ever be argued before her was not something she could discuss. And that's kind of the Ginsburg rule, having kind of been power washed by everybody who has ever testified since Ginsburg, and a little bit less with each iteration, right? So Bork with a little bit less candor. So I think that's where that was coming from. Ben, maybe you heard something different. Oh, you can listen.
Well, I didn't listen to it. So, look, I have a lot of sympathy with a nominee, any nominee, who is reticent in front of that committee, because that situation is inherently extortionate on the part of senators, and they are trying to gouge out of people commitments on specific issues. And so I think the famous example of this, of course, is Chief Justice Rehnquist, who in 1957 wrote a law review article urging members of the committee to be, and this was in response to Brown v. Board of Ed, actually, to be more aggressive in demanding that nominees ask questions, because we don't want people who are going to do things like that anymore. That was actually what he wrote. And then, of course, in 1972, he's nominated to the court himself, much to his own surprise. And he is confronted, I think, by Ted Kennedy with this article. And Kennedy reads him the relevant parts and says, hey, do you stand by what you wrote? And Rehnquist, to his great credit, said, I absolutely stand by it from the point of view of the Senate. I'm not sure I really gave much thought to the point of view of the nominee. And I thought that was really candid and reflects a genuine institutional conflict that is real, and that that's thing number one. Thing number two, look, I do think the canons of ethics by their terms refer to pending and impending cases. So a case that either is before the court, it would be unethical to talk about, or that you have reason to believe is presently to come before the court, it would be unethical to talk about. The prudential issue, which I think is what she's really referring to, is if I commit myself substantively on an issue, I have testified under oath. I will be on the court having testified under oath about my views of this, and that will weigh on me. And I think that's the issue that she and other judges of left, right, Democrat, and Republican have all converged around and all tried to defend. And I don't have a problem. In fact, I think it's appropriate for them to try to defend that line. The ridiculous aspect is that the line keeps moving, right? So it used to be, I'm happy to talk about judicial philosophy, don't ask me about cases. And it has migrated into the sort of don't ask me about anything except my kids, unless you're implying that I shouldn't be X, in which case, you're not allowed to ask me about my kids either. And there is something really gross about the way the line has continued to shift.
So we are joined by
Leah.
Leah Littman of Strict Scrutiny.
Substitute one strict scrutiny host for another. That's how it works.
Yeah, you guys are just
easy
so
come,
fun.
easy go.
You're so fungible. Like I have playing cards, and I just throw them out. It's so nice to see you, Mike Godwin. You have a question, and we'll give Leah the first word on answering it.
Before Mike Godwin asks his question, though, how much of these hearings did you watch, and are you and on the totally chill to totally appalled spectrum, where do you fall?
Dahlia wants to know everything.
I am so angry and appalled. I'm calm right now. Like it is that level of
meds.
Frustration and disgust. Unless you count chocolate, cheesecake, LaCroix,
I've
and
eaten a lot
Moscato
this week
as medicine. No. So I watched a lot of them. I had to mute certain senators just for my mental
let's
health.
find out
Dahlia
if you muted the same senators. Dahlia, don't say. Which senators did you mute? Extra points if you got the same ones as Dahlia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really good.
I might have some more. Ben Sass. Okay, great. I'm so glad we did this. So he was the one that I always had to mute, and then I would selectively mute Ted Cruz.
All
Who
right.
knew? Who knew?
Mike Godwin, the floor is yours.
Well, that's 2 for 2. I'm really impressed. I think the thing I felt best about this fall is that I opted out of watching the first presidential debate, and I opted out of watching the hearings on ACB. So, and I feel kind of calm and relaxed.
Let's see, man.
Yeah, but my question, let me just ask my question, because I've been preoccupied with Clarence Thomas's his Section 230.
Excellent thoughts on Section 230.
He has many thoughts on Section 230, and by sheerest coincidence, Chairman Pai issued a statement today saying that he's going to do a rulemaking on Section 230, which theoretically, I don't know how he does that. I don't know how the commission does that. But one of the things I think that you see, and this is what I really want you to comment on, is the fact that there seems to be this sort of coordination where we're inviting cases to come to the court so that we can narrow 230 and strike down, by the way, Times versus Sullivan, Clarence Thomas. He doesn't like Times versus Sullivan either. And this is like, oh my God, it's really insane. So that's what I think, but I want to know what you think.
I want to know what you think about this too. Obviously, I have opinions. Mike, I'll read your piece, but Dahlia and Kate, or Dahlia and, see, I just did it. Dahlia and Leah. I called you Kate because you're in her square.
I'll go quickly because I'm more interested in what Leah thinks. But I will say, I thought to me the most arresting bit of the hearing was Sheldon Whitehouse really painstakingly laying out how the movement works, and the sort of day one on the dark money, and FedSoc, and how nominees are catapulted to the court. And day two was this, right? Was that there is this machinery that invites cases, that leapfrogs, that seeks to lose in the lower courts so that they get, like, he sort of laid it out. This is part, there's amicus briefs. It's so weird. Where are they coming from? Oh, they're all on the side of, and he laid it out. And I was really, the reason I say arrested is like I was on like a Slack channel with all of the editors at the magazine and nobody had heard of any of this. Like it's the best kept secret in show business. And of course, this is all happening. And of course, when like Thomas and Alito are inviting somebody to, they're saying like, it didn't work in Kim Davis's case, but somebody really needs to challenge Obergefell. Like that's obviously what that is. And it just, to me, it ties so neatly with what Judge Barrett was saying about what is super precedent, because anything that she feels is unsettled is now not super precedent. That's why I guess Griswold is out. That's why Obergefell is out. But what she fails to say is that in her own writings or in her own dissents, she's actually inviting challenges. She is herself unsettling, and that's part of the project. And so for me, it was just like this sort of utter sort of falsity of pretending that, the language she kept using was, cases just sort of wend their way through the courts, as though this is just some sort of natural, organic progression, and, the good cases rise to the top, and that there isn't this multi-million-dollar engine that is aided and abetted by judges at the lower courts and now at the Supreme Court asking people to unsettle cases. And so to me, I think it was sort of both that nobody knew this, like at my own magazine, everyone was like, huh, really? That happens? Like that there's an ATM machine for amicus briefs that will spit out exactly the facts you want? In coordination with Judge Barrett sort of suddenly living in a world where I guess now Griswold is unsettled because judges are inviting it to be unsettled. I think it's just not a descriptive category. It's it is a call for action. And I don't know if that's coherent what I just said, but it's really
completely coherent. It's like, who shall rid me of this troublesome priest? Type of like, it's like some type of like, it's like, but it really is. It's like, here is the problem that I want to solve. How will you solve it for me, people that I like? And like, then you go and you follow your amici, and like, that's it. Like, so Leah, go ahead. Do you have any thoughts?
No, I would just give one specific example from the abortion context, because, of course, it was Judge Barrett who says, I have no agenda to overturn Casey or Roe. It's just cases that come to us. And after Justice Kennedy had that throwaway line in Gonzalez versus Carhart, where he noted that, he suspected that women regret their abortions when they have them, and that might be a valid interest for a state to use to regulate abortion or restrict it. That kind of generated this cottage industry of amicus briefs of like women who regret abortions. And so, judges' statements, whether it's in cases or public appearances or academic writings, invite briefs, and then the briefs happen, and then the studies happen, and the academic scholarship happens. And I think another way we should view these exchanges is, Justice Thomas, as Mike noted, has questioned New York Times versus Sullivan and now the scope of Section 2230 immunity. I think it would just be strange to overlook the fact that those are also things that Trump and the Trump administration are doing, right? So like this is part of the feedback loop as well, right? Like you get government officials floating a legal theory, and then you have other government officials, and again like academics and like movement lawyers and interested litigants, just following up on that.
Yeah, I gotta say, so I'm just gonna really say something really quick, Ben. I know we're over, or right at time, but like I actually don't know that I think that this is a necessarily bad idea for justices to better state, like how many times do clerks or whatever, how many times do you hear about like judges finding these issues brought before the court, but finding a more interesting issue somewhere buried in like all of the facts and the brief. And it's not the issue necessarily brought by the court, but they want to answer that issue. And so they kind of like, or something. And so like, you could kind of see that if like you think that someone's not doing a great job bringing the issue before you, being like, this is kind of what we're looking for. If we were like, would that be a better way for the Supreme Court to work? Or is that a completely like, you think that would turn it on its entire head and create just kind of like this insane market for briefs and cases that meet these types of like vague descriptions that are put out in a 10-page opinion?
I think what is fair is for a judge or a justice to do some writing about the kinds of cases that make for better Supreme Court decisions, right? So you have Supreme Court decisions saying like, we would like to take issue or we would like to take cases where an issue is dispositive, that is, where it will actually affect the outcome in a case, rather than just us opining on an issue that won't actually have an effect on the outcome. What is a little bit different to me is that this particular practice makes the act of judging and being on the court much more legislative in nature, because it allows the court to select the issues on which it is making law. And we don't usually think about courts as agenda setting and being able to say, like, well, I want to make this area of law, or like move this area of law, and rather just being kind of these like neutral passive receptacles.
But that's funny, because they are agenda setting. When they
they are, but like, then you have like Judge Barrett denying it.
Yes, I know, but I hate that. Like, that's bullshit. The docket is an agenda setting thing. Like, that is, and like the fact that I don't know. I was very mixed about this, because especially obviously this Thomas opinion came out in my exact specific field. And so like, there's a whole other set of garbage, like politics and everything with that. But like, the idea of having a more robustly transparent writ like process is actually very appealing to me. And I think that is like, would maybe be good for the court in the long haul. But I just don't know that this is how I want it to happen. Let's put it that way.
We need to wrap.
Yeah.
But the poll is up.
Ooh, what's the poll?
And you should all vote on it. Because this is actually, people don't understand this, but our poll actually does determine the future. So, vote as though you were actually one of the fates weaving in a dark hovel somewhere the future. Thank you, Dahlia and Leah and Kate Shaw, for joining us today. I'm sure we will have much more to discuss as this travesties on.
Oh my gosh. Do we have a Stevie? Yes.
Wait,
Okay.
what's going on?
She has a very adorable dog that is famous on the internet. Yes. Hello, famous Stevie. Oh my God, you're moving. Oh, she's
Famous
so much.
Stevie says hello.
Stevie is a lot smaller than I thought.
You need to meet Arby. Hold on.
Wait, where's Arby? Nina, where are you?
No, you're
My
a good
dog
girl.
is like
You're a good girl.
not to be found. Gergie was just in here, Ben, wandering around.
Gergie wanders in and Gergie, do you want to come in? Misha?
Misha?
No,
Oh my gosh.
they-
Look at that little yawn. I love how Golden Doodles yawn. Hi.
Wow.
Oh, hi, Arby.
She just
Is
came
this a
to us yesterday.
I was just gonna say, is that a kitten?
She's Arby. She's named after RBG because look, she's got a little white ruff.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my
How
God.
old is she?
Oh my God.
She's
Really?
10. Anyway, Leah, Stevie has given me life for so long. So
I know. I love
My little
baby
baby.
pictures.
Well,
It's amazing.
even
They're
had-
amazing. Oh, I love Arby. Arby, what a good name.
I know.
It's so good.
so tomorrow, important announcement. Actually, two important announcements. First of all, Lawfare Live launches at noon tomorrow.
Put up
You
the
should
link.
there's 115 of you here on Crowdcast and another 130 some odd on YouTube. Go sign up for Lawfare Live, register. We're going to have a discussion which is going to consist of entirely your all's questions with Jack Goldsmith and Bob Bauer about their new After Trump book. So that's announcement number one. Announcement number two, tomorrow's show going to be an hour late because I got to get out to the cabin and Kate screwed up the schedule.
Kate screwed up and
So
something right over the show.
we're gonna be at 6 o'clock tomorrow. Now I know that's gonna be tough for some of you. You're gonna show up and you're gonna say, "Why isn't it starting?" You were warned. It's gonna be at 6, not 5 tomorrow, and it's gonna be with Dan Kleidman, who was my predecessor as Justice Department reporter at Legal Times. We worked together when we were like cubs. And then he went off to do great things and is now runs Yahoo News. And I'm going to tell embarrassing stories about him. And we're going to talk about, if you guys are really cool, I may even tell you the story about the giant wheel of cheese.
Wait,
so,
what?
There's
Like
a giant
the West
wheel
Wing
of cheese
giant
story.
wheel of cheese?
I don't know. I've never watched The West Wing. There was a giant wheel of cheese. It involved Dan Clydeman. It's a cool story.
I'm pretty
We
sure
can
this has to do
embarrass
with the
him
West
by
Wing.
telling it. That'll be at 6 o'clock tomorrow, which is to say 23 hours and 53 minutes from now. And until then, Kate, whoa, Kate's vanished. Until then,
We don't have fun anymore or even a stable internet connection. So, bye, guys.
bye.
Thank you so much. This was a really fun Geek Out session.